Hello and welcome to Modelling Misadventures. Now I've always had an idea to build a model of the car that I learnt to drive in, and that was a Series 3 Land Rover back in the 1970s. So I had a look online and I found a 3D printable model of a Land Rover, but unfortunately it was a modern Land Rover Defender and not a Series 3. But I decided to have a go and to see if I could convert it back into a Series 3 using some modifications. And this video is going to show the build sequence from start to finish. I hope you enjoy it.
Now the model I decided to use was this one, which is made by a company called 3D Sets, which is based in the Czech Republic. And they make some fabulous 3D printable, functional models. And these are designed for full radio control. So I purchased this Land Rover and downloaded the files and started to print it, and then had to figure out how was I going to convert this model into a Series 3. Now the finished article would need to look something like this one, although the one that was owned by my father did not have a spare tyre on the bonnet. But it was the same colour and it was a hard top. So the 3D printing got underway. And this took a considerable amount of time. In fact, it took about a month to print off all the various parts. And you can see here all the different components coming together on the print plate. And here you can see the bonnet being printed, and lastly here we get to the wheel arches. This is a test fit of the chassis, subframe and wheel arches, and you can see at the front that I've already fitted the steering servo. Now in order to convert this into a Series 3 model, I had to find a way of recessing the front grille. In a Land Rover Defender, the grille goes straight across, but in a Series 3 it was inset. Now most 3D modelers would attempt to redesign the parts using computer-aided design, but I'm afraid I don't have any of those skills. So I had to go back to the old-fashioned way and use a hacksaw to trim the parts down to the appropriate size. And here is the subframe reassembled with the front section cut away. Again, when it came to the front grille panel, I'm afraid I resorted to the old-fashioned method and simply cut away the center section. Now here I've put the front wheel arches back on, but there was an annoying little grille sitting on the top of the wing. So this had to be filled in and sanded to make the area smooth. And this is what the model looks like with the front and rear wheel arches reattached. And you can see now the center section of the front grille has been cut away. Now I needed to find a way of recreating the front section of the Land Rover, and I was lucky enough to find online some files for a Series 3 conversion. And these just had to be scaled to the right size and then fitted into the model. And you can see that a little bit of filling and sanding was required in order to get these to fit. Now another major difference between the Land Rover Defender and the Land Rover Series 3 was in the shape of the wheel arches. And these had to be modified to get them to the correct shape. Again, I was unable to go down the computer-aided design route, so I went back to the good old-fashioned modeling techniques and recreated some wheel arches using balsa wood, and then I covered these in some polystyrene sheet. Here you can see the modified wheel arches fitted, but again you'll notice that a fair degree of filling and sanding was required in order to get a satisfactory finish. It was now time to move on to the mechanical components, and this model has a completely 3D printed gearbox, and this assembles together very nicely, and you can see here all the gears in place and covered in grease. And this is what it looks like when it's actually moving, and it's really well engineered. The gears mesh perfectly and everything rotates really well within the bearings. This is what the gearbox looks like when the sides have been added together and the motor has been inserted. And you can see at the bottom the two drive shafts that come out at the front and the back. And that's because this is a four-wheel drive vehicle. And now we came to another modification. The windscreen in a Land Rover Defender is completely different to that seen in a Series 3. And on this image, the one on the left comes from the Land Rover Defender and the one on the right comes from a Land Rover Series 3. And again, I was able to find this conversion part online. Now, in order to make the new windscreen fit onto the model, I had to remove the lower section and replace it with the lower section of the Defender windscreen so that it would attach in the appropriate place. And this is what the model now looks like with the motor and gearbox installed and the new windscreen in place. The next stage was to work on the suspension, axles and drivetrain, and again these were all 3D printed. Another major difference between the Defender and the Series 3 is the shape and length of the bonnet. And what I had to do here was actually print a completely new bonnet because the first one could not be modified. And again I was able to find a bonnet from a Series 3 Land Rover online. And what I actually had to do is to remove some of the fittings such as the hinges and latch from the Defender bonnet and glue them onto the Series 3 bonnet. Now, with the body parts complete, I could get down to some painting. I first sprayed the parts white with a white primer and then followed this up with a pale green that I got in a spray can from a hardware store. Now onto the wheels, and these were also 3D printed, but the suspension is somewhat different on the model to the actual real vehicle, because on the real Land Rover there were leaf springs, but on this model we had spring shock absorbers. The seats brought back some real memories, because in the old Series 3 there were 3 seats in the front cab all next to each other, and I remember vividly 3 people sitting abreast driving along in the front of that Land Rover. But the Land Rover Defender only has 2 seats, and so I had to print an extra one and modify them to make them more realistic, and this included removing the headrests because there were no such luxuries in the old Series 3. So the model is now really starting to take shape, and I've added some of the interior details. And in these pictures you can see the various modifications, such as the shortened grille, the modified wheel arches, the shortened bonnet, the new windscreen, and the 3 seats sitting across. I've also added a dashboard. Now I was also able to find a 3D printable grille for the Series 3, and I finished this off by adding some mesh to the rear of it to give it a more realistic appearance. And finally, I printed off a Land Rover logo onto photographic paper and glued it on. Now, the dashboard that came with this model isn't strictly accurate for a Series 3, but I had to make do with it because I couldn't find an alternative. The steering wheel was also completely inaccurate, and I decided to make a completely new one from scratch. What I did try to recreate was the various knobs and levers that the Series 3 Land Rover had for changing between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, and I think those turned out pretty well. This just shows the fitting of the electronic components. On the left the receiver and on the right the electronic speed controller, and these sit in a compartment just underneath the front seats. We now got to the stage where I could attach the side doors and the wing mirrors. The final part of the assembly was the roof, and this had an annoying little window in the side at the top. The Series 3 Land Rover didn't have this, so I had to fill it in with a piece of wood and then sand and fill it until it was completely smooth. After that, the roof could be spray painted in a cream colour to match the original Land Rover. And with the roof fitted, the final part of the assembly is attachment of the rear door. I've seen a number of these types of models assembled, and quite a few modelers put in working lights, but I decided not to do that, and I just painted the lights that came with the model, and I think the end result was still perfectly satisfactory. Now it was time for a final check of the running gear and suspension, and I checked everything over and actually put a little bit of silicone oil on it just to smooth things over. All that remained was the finishing touches, such as the lights, windscreen wipers, perspex in the glass doors and number plates. And this is what the model looked like at the end. Here's just a few pictures of it in its finished state.
Was that any good?